Hello. I hope you're having a great start to 2022. And if you clicked on this video, I hope you're thinking about making some changes to have a more plant based diet. So, here are some of my tips to becoming a vegetarian that I've found over the years, or just incorporating more vegetables into your eating. So, let's just start by getting some kind of definitions out of the way to begin with. So, from out there, there are basically like five different types of vegetarianism and varying scales in what you do and do not eat. So, if we start with the most strict. A vegan is someone who doesn't eat any animal products. That includes meat, fish, poultry, and also includes any animal byproducts, so like eggs, cheeses, and even things like honey. Now, this is the most strict. Um, and I'm not saying any of these are good or bad. I'm just saying this is kind of the most strict definition. The next type of vegetarian is a lacto-ovo vegetarian. So this is someone who doesn't eat meat or poultry or fish, but does eat some kind of animal products that include mostly things like dairy and eggs from different types of poultry. And this is actually what I am. So I eat eggs pretty much every day for breakfast. I have cheese with my meals, but I don't eat any other meats and things like that. A more restrictive version of this is the ovo vegetarian, so where they're not having any lacto products, they're not having any cheeses such as or butter or milk, but they do have eggs because it's a byproduct. But they also don't eat any meat or poultry or fish and things like that. The next type is a pescatarian, and so these people don't eat red meat or white meat or poultry, but they will eat fish as a kind of an exception to that rule. And then they also have things that are dairy or eggs related or other animal products. The last kind is kind of is how I started, and that's called a flexitarian. So this is someone who will try to eat a plant-based diet pretty much as possible, but they'll make exceptions to that rule based on events or where they're at and other things like that. So, when I started my journey to become a lacto ovo vegetarian as I am right now, I started out as a flexitarian. So when I first was starting to live on my own, and I started buying meat because that's how I had always grown up. But a lot of the meat that I was buying was kind of going bad because I couldn't buy enough or I couldn't go through it quick enough. So then from there, I started buying less and less meat and basically just replacing it with vegetables and eggs and cheese and things like that I could make. And vegetables I found, you could use a half a pepper and stay good in the fridge, whereas if I used half a steak, it started to go bad or I'd have to freeze it. But what I made for exceptions in that kind of when I was being more of a flexitarian was if I went out to say like a family barbecue or a friend's party and someone made some kind of meat, I would make an exception at that point. And then if I went out to dinner and there wasn't really anything that I was liking on the menu, but I didn't mind, say, like a meat based dish, I would have that instead. Now, over time, I started to cut back and became more and more strict to where I am now. So, from there, I would say like my first tip is that the hard truth about being a vegetarian is that eating out can be kind of a struggle. So I think the first step for me to say is you want to make your own food as much as possible because it allows you to control what's going into the dish. So if you do want to have eggs and cheese but don't want meat, you can control that. If you want to be vegan, it's easier to control that. You can buy things at the store to make it yourself. So you can buy, say, vegan butter instead of regular butter and then make your dishes in that. Or you can choose to cook things in oil. I found personally, especially in certain parts of the country, menus can be very limited when it comes to going out. So if you are going to go out when you start to transition like this, lean towards cuisines that have a more vegetable based diet or plant based diet. So what I've found has been pretty good is a lot of Indian cooking has great flavor and spices, and a lot of them will have a plant based dish as just a main course, and they'll have a whole variety of them. And then they might have a meat equivalent, but they will have enough on the menu. Another easy one that I found as well, if you're going to eat out, is a lot of Mexican food because you can kind of go with the blend of having, beans, rice, say peppers and onions, salsa, and a burrito, for example. So you can get a vegetarian burrito pretty easily. And sure, they may have cheese, but a lot of them, if you're trying to not have cheese, they could just remove it pretty easily because it's kind of all assembled in what you want. Things that are a lot harder is anything that's just like pure American bar food, because what I've found when I've eaten out in those places, they may have one, maybe two options that are vegetarian. And these may be things like the Impossible Burger. And maybe you don't like that kind of processed meat. Like I personally don't think that it's very good. But it may, or the only other option may be either a side and an appetizer or a salad. And if that's kind of limited and you're basically going to a restaurant where you only have one option, that's why I recommend pretty much try in the beginning to not eat out as much. It's also a little bit healthier for you, and start cooking for yourself. So that leads to my second tip when it comes to becoming a vegetarian, is that when you do cook, stir fry meals are going to be your friend in the beginning, because basically you can kind of follow rule of three when it comes to making a stir fry meal. We basically have three vegetables that go into it. So something that's going to be aromatic, something that's going to provide texture, and something that's going to provide either like flavor or sweetness. So a good, really good combo if you're talking about something like this for like a pasta dish, for example. I really like the combo of say mushrooms, onions, and broccoli. And I can make pasta on the side. I can stir fry those together, add my seasoning into it, and then serve it over pasta, maybe with a pasta sauce, like a tomato based sauce that can be easily made. I have links down below to a tomato sauce recipe if you're interested in that. And then it's really easy and very customizable. And if you don't like those, say, three vegetables, you can sub them out. Another good one that I really like is stuff like fajitas, right? So you can kind of go with the combo of like peppers, onions, and like a third vegetable that you like. I also like to say tofu is a good option as a third vegetable because it is a protein, and they can really good at be absorbing its flavors. Another good one for a third kind of meal is something that's like a kind of Asian inspired, just stir fry with like rice. So I typically like the things with like teriyaki, and I'll like a teriyaki sauce is the simmer in the vegetables. So I'll do things with, maybe again same combo of maybe like carrots, broccoli, and peppers. Stir fry that in a teriyaki sauce. Serve that over a bed of rice. And the nice thing about that is that's pretty customizable. Again, you can change out the sauce for something that's not teriyaki. Maybe you want soy sauce. Maybe you want another type of more Asian inspired flavor. And then you can add things like fresh ginger and fresh garlic to kind of season it up. And then that's pretty shareable for people, 'cause especially if you're making it for someone else or you're making it, it's pretty scalable as well. So that's kind of what I like to do for my kind of weekly stuff for when I make meals, especially for dinner. Breakfast is kind of the other end of it. It kind of depends on where you want to be and how much of a breakfast eater you are. So maybe you do like eggs, scrambled eggs, or a breakfast burrito may be the right direction to head for you. Maybe you want to stay away from that. So maybe something like oatmeal or some kind of granola that you make for yourself. It just kind of depends on what you like to eat for breakfast and the amount of food. And for me, for lunches, what I typically do is just make enough dinner food that I can have a leftover and take that. So I'm not like fighting at lunch to figure out something and having to go out like we were saying. The third tip basically comes back to the first tip, but basically stay away from fast food. Fast food has very, very limited options because they're all, especially in America, they're mostly based on the idea of having a meat and potatoes type of diet, right? So if you think of the biggest chain probably out there for fast food, McDonald's, their pride and joy is going to be, like a Big Mac and French fries. There's not really a vegetarian equivalent to that. So a lot of those chains probably won't have an option for you, or again, it may be limited to like a salad or a side. So just kind of stay away from that. And that's also just healthier for you. So yeah, lean towards making more food at dinner so that you can have a lunch left over for the next day. Now, another tip for when you're starting to cook, is some recipes may call for, say, meat based broth. So maybe you're making a chicken noodle soup, for example, or equivalent, right? And you want to make something similar to that as you're transitioning from having a meat based diet to more of a plant based diet. By simply replacing the meat based broth with a vegetable broth, it's pretty easy to just a one for one equivalent. Now, a lot of stores will have vegetable broth, or some stores I found too will have a mushroom based broth, which is also a good option to give you a little bit more umami flavor. And I have a link to how to make your own vegetable broth or vegetable stock down below, and I'll link that video. And so that's kind of an easy one. Another, recipes that may call for something like that is like gravies. So if you're replacing, say, at Thanksgiving time, you're using things like, the turkey drippings or whatever to make a turkey gravy. If you simply just take out that portion of it and just replace it with veggie broth, you can make a veggie gravy pretty easily. Same thing with, say, stuffing. It's pretty similar on holidays where it's just easy to replace the actual, broth with a vegetable-based broth instead. Same thing with when it comes with like tomato sauces. Just simply don't buy a meat sauce or make a meat sauce. You just kind of make it where it's, flavored with the similar things like a tomato sauce would be. So basil, oregano, garlic, things like that in it. And it's just basically made with just tomatoes and maybe some oil and some other, maybe an onion or two. So that kind of thing where you can kind of transition from, say, a meat sauce to a regular sauce, and you're probably not going to notice the difference dramatically. But if you're becoming more plant-based diet or a vegetarian, that's very easy to do. Again, when it comes to cooking, and this would be like the next tip I would say, is you kind of want to have a rotation of meals that are your kind of your go-to every week so that you're not scrambling and thinking about it. For me, I do a lot of prep on the weekends to figure out what I'm going to buy at the store or at my farm stand, which will be in the next tip I'll talk about. And so I'm looking for things and planning out meals, say, for the next 5 or 7 days, depending on how much I want to go back out to the store during the week. And then I have a rotation of things that I typically eat like every week. So this for me is typically like I have black bean burgers almost every week. I used to have pizza every week where I just buy the dough from the store or other types of stir fry like we talked about. And so maybe on the weekends I go a little bit more complex. And another big one is like you make soups in the colder season and things like that. So just kind of have a rotation of meals that you like and you enjoy and that you can make every single week and that you don't get bored of, right? And so maybe the variation is not, maybe you want a teriyaki based stir fry, but you don't want to have broccoli in it. Just sub it out for a different type of vegetable that was, say, in season or was in desire, like a bok choy instead. That could be a good substitute. So that's kind of a good tip. And then the next one I'll talk about, which is kind of like the next level up when you start to become more, is for me to become a vegetarian, it became very much of a lifestyle choice. And I kind of think that I describe myself as like a foodie vegetarian. So if that's the case and you're making a lot of food for yourself, and I pretty much make all my food from scratch, 7 nights a week at this point, is find a local farm or a farm stand or a CSA in your area and go to them to get your vegetables, especially in the summertime, because fresh vegetables will taste so much better than stuff that's been sitting out in the store. And especially if you're eating stuff that's in season. So in the early part of the spring, greens are typically in season where I live. So that's things like arugula, spinach, kale. And those are going to have a ton of more flavor than, say, buying the equivalent at the grocery store. And then as you move towards the summer, you'll get things that like berries will be in season in the summer. You'll get peppers towards the later part of the summer. You'll get potatoes at the tail end of the summer into the fall. Fall, you'll get like squashes, like acorn squash and pumpkins. And so if you kind of eat seasonally that way, you're always going to be having peak flavor of vegetables. So that's kind of what I would recommend is find something that's local for you. And then again, you're also supporting a local business and farmers and things like that. So it's just better for everybody. And your food doesn't come from very far away. But I'm just saying the best thing about doing that is that you'll get really, really flavorful stuff that's going to be better in the grocery store. And sometimes it's pretty much the same price. So the CSA that I'm a part of, it's actually, we pay like a gift card into it where like we basically pay up front in the beginning of the season so they can plant all the vegetables. And then we just have like a gift card that we just take off money. So it's only taking what we want throughout the whole summer. So when it does become like time for pepper season, for example, I can buy a ton of peppers and then freeze them, for example, so I can have them later down the line. So that's another tip. If like you do find stuff that's in season and you buy a lot of it, like say you can buy in bulk, if you cut it up and freeze it in a freezer bag and keep it in the freezer, it will stay throughout the winter. And then you can just simply, pull it out and throw it quickly into a stir fry. And as it defrosts, it will kind of release some moisture, but the flavor will still be there because it's peak frozen. Another good one too with that kind of stuff that I like to do is fermentation, because a lot of stuff, if you ferment it, it will actually prolong the shelf life. So pickles are a great thing to do. So in our garden here, we grow cucumbers every year, and we pretty much just take the cucumbers and make all different types of pickles with them, whether that be quick pickles or bread and butter pickles. Those are great to have, and they pretty much last in our pantry all winter until it's time to grow more cucumbers next season and make more of them. This also works for things like cabbage, so you can make things like sauerkraut or I also like to make coleslaw with cabbage, so things like that. And then finally, if you're really getting into it and you have the ability to, I would say try gardening as a kind of like the expert level tip of becoming, because you can really control what you're growing. And gardening can be a learning curve, and it's a whole nother realm of stuff that I'm probably not going to really talk about. I'll just show you stuff I harvest from my garden. But if you're looking to start, what I would say is pick stuff that grows year round and will give you maximum flavor year round. So this is things like herbs. So some really easy herbs to grow is basil, oregano, thyme, rosemary, mint, and this stuff is all great because when in peak season, you can pick it and then dry it out, and you have basically like dry oregano. That's the equivalent of what you buy at the store, but that oregano plant will keep growing, and you have a whole bunch of it over time. And they can be sit in little pots and little containers, and they're really good at growing year after year after year. Basil does seem to go bad after about a year, and you have to replant it. But you can buy that at the store. You can also buy starters from a local nursery. And another really good one that is a great kind of like reuse of things is green onions if you buy them from the store. So if you actually cut off the stalk, you can keep the little white part and plant that, and it will regrow and just continue to grow green onions. And once it gets kind of, weak and it's not as nice looking, you can just pull them up and buy new green onions from the grocery store, and you'll have a continued batch of green onions for whatever you need them for. That's kind of my tips to get kind of getting started. Let me know down below. Do you have any other few tips for other people to help them? Let me know what kind of vegetarian that you are and what kind of stuff you like to make to kind of have for meals. And if you found any of this helpful, please subscribe so you don't miss the next one. And I'll bring you more vegetarian based dishes and other things like that. And don't forget to smash the like button for this. I'll see you again soon.